We'll open the Diversion Authority Public Outreach meeting. And first item is minutes from June 20. Well, actually, let's, do we want to? Yeah, let's have a roll call.
Mr. Olson?
Here.
Mayor Dardis? Mr. Van Amberg? Mr. Whalen? Mr. Gust?
Here.
Ms. Mastel? Mr. Pollock?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Ms. Carlson?
All right, thank you. First item then is minutes from the June 24th meeting. Do we have a motion on those minutes?
Do we have a quorum?
4.
Make move approval.
We have 5. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Rick seconds. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Item 2 is a North Dakota Legislative Water Topics Overview Committee Presentation Recap. Rocky.
Thanks. I'm going to stand at the podium since we have some in the room here and some online. So we put together some slides. I guess I'd like confirmation from the Mr. Pollock. Is that, can you see our slides? Are they shared? There we go. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Can you guys see the slides?
I don't see it. Well, now the screen went blank. Okay, now I see public outreach meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks for the confirmation.
And while I have your attention, I just want to apologize for my absence in the past, but I have another meeting that takes place at this same time most every other Wednesday, and so that's why I've been absent so many times.
All right, thanks, Ken.
So there's been a number of legislative items. Obviously, this is an election year, and we have legislative session in North Dakota starting in January. And so there's been a couple things that have happened. There was, Joel's done a lot of communication with the legislature, either at the North Dakota Water Topics Overview Committee or with the State Water Commission. And we've also had several different discussion points with what they're calling themselves the Cass County Caucus. Both parties together meet on a regular basis here and have been really interested in the project updates. And I think that'll be really helpful for us going forward. I think that Cass County Caucus is something that developed last session that we haven't had in previous legislative sessions, and so now we have a group where we can present to everybody at once and hopefully, identify some champions that can help us carry forward and really get to know the project details. And I think that's been really helpful. One of the legislative items I wanted to make sure that you were aware of is the funding. We're working on a cost share application for our money from the 2019 legislative session, and one thing we've been working with the State Water Commission on is, they get their budget ahead of, it's a 2-year budget ahead of time. And then they rely on the Resources Trust Fund as their revenue source for water projects. The Resources Trust Fund is directly tied to oil production and oil price. And that has really not been all that positive and been much lower than expectations. Just for an example, last month they expected 18 million in revenue, and it was something closer to 2.9. And so they've seen a big reduction in what they expected, and they've asked every water project in the state to really take a close look at their books and see if they still need all the money that they said they did, if they're willing to defer anything and help, make the budget decisions easier. And so we were a part of that process. Joel had a number of conversations with legislators on it. We had a meeting with the governor's office about it as well. And I think when we went back and looked at the books, we were able to defer $22.5 million and still have an efficient spend schedule through the biennium. That starts to look less positive as you look forward into the next bienniums. And I think that's a problem for another day as we approach the next legislative session. But through this biennium, we were comfortable with that and have submitted that back to the Water Commission. We have not yet submitted our cost share application for that money. And so one update I wanted to give you is the Water Commission at their last 2 meetings have actually tabled all cost share applications. And so there is no new cost share applications being approved. And I think what they're really trying to do is get through sort of the down part of the roller coaster. I think oil got really low and production dropped off and wells were shut in, and they're starting to see a pretty strong rebound. It's not back to the level it was, and I have a slide on that, but wanted to just update you that I think they will start addressing those in the future when things start to level out again or get back to a more normal pace. And so we will be part of their workload, I guess, going forward at the future meetings. And just to show you one slide I took from a presentation that was given to the Water Commission. This was given by the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. And there's a lot going on this slide, but a couple relevant things. If you follow that black or gray line, that is the oil production in barrels per day. And you can see, you know, end of last year, earlier this year, it really took a sharp decline. And a lot of that's tied to oil prices, which I don't have a slide on, but oil prices dropped pretty considerably. And so they're tied together. And if you look at that, how it compares to the Resources Trust Fund, you can see why their revenue was, you know, just a fraction of what they expected it to be. It has rebounded, as you see there. There's a slight uptick. And then where you see the more gentle curve is what their prediction is. And I guess a couple things I'd like to point out is that it has rebounded, you know, not to the level of what it was, but to a strong, you know, I think they're at 1 million barrels per day right now, or just over. But I thought the interesting thing is when you look at the x-axis on the bottom there, this chart goes out to 2045. So it's a pretty long-term revenue source, certainly not forever. But these blips in the historical record here of oil, you know, has a direct impact on our immediate need on the project. But when you look at the state's ability over the long term, they're still a very strong source for funding and for water projects. And so I think some of our strategy may change and length of funding requests may change, but I think the state's still pretty confident it'll be there for us, and we're confident as well. But I don't, Joel, if you had anything to add on any of those topics. I don't get to see your face, so you have to flag me.
No, thanks, Rocky. No, Rocky did a good recap. So, you know, I think I'd just like the board and the committees to know that we have a lot of flexibility in our financial plan. And even though we need to have a state contribution, that contribution can be a long-term contribution. With the WIFIA loan potentially closing this fall, really gives us that flexibility to be able to work with the state. So I expect as we move into the next legislative session, you know, a lot of good conversations with the legislature on timing of that funding, when those funds come in, and what that impact could potentially be for financing charges related to the WIFIA loan, and how we distribute those dollars out over the course of construction. So our estimated expenditures are certainly going to look different than what they actually are going to be, and we are going to have that certainty once we get the P3 bids in at the end of the year here. And so that's going to really provide a lot of that clarity and that context for our discussions with the legislature on the timing of the state funds and how they come into the program. So.
There's no restrictions on the WIFIA funds, is there? Can they be used any place in the project, or is it?
They have been identified as eligible components of the diversion project, and if John Shockley was here, he could explain it probably in better detail than I can.
Sure.
The way I understand is that the eligible components, you know, are identified, mainly the channel components.
Okay.
And so, yes, to answer your question, there are some restrictions on what we could use the WIFIA funding for, but it's mainly related to the construction of the channel, and that's our biggest financial outlay obligations over the next 6 years would be the channel construction, and so that WIFIA loan really allows us to begin construction and work with the state on when the state dollars are going to come in, whether it be sooner or later. That really impacts then the financing charges on the WIFIA loan. which, just to put that in context, with historic record lows right now, and the WIFIA program tied to the 10-year Treasury bond, we're really looking at, you know, an interest rate somewhere maybe just over 1%, 1.5%, somewhere around that range. So, and so the positive thing for us is that with the rates so low and the outlook to continue for the next few months, we'll be looking at near record interest rate lows as we lock in that interest rate this fall. So.
You know, Mr. Olson, there's I think it was $1.1 billion in eligible expenses that were identified. So while it's certainly not the entire project, between that and local and state funding, there's a lot of flexibility to, you know, apply the money broadly.
And then one other question of the P3, because the state is low on funding, will that affect the P3 contracts at all? I mean, is there going to be any question that we can pay them, or are they going to question that?
No. So there's obviously backstops in our financial plan. The intent language is what the developers are looking at, and so it's important that we continue to engage the legislature in ultimately getting to the full intent in order to round out our financial plan. So if you recall, in the last legislative session, we requested an additional $120 million in intent that was not granted. And so whether that's 120 or 110, it's really going to depend on what the ultimate bids are at the end of the year. And so we hope to be going into the legislative session with bids in hand and know with certainty what that ultimate final intent request of the state is going to be. I really view the intent language to be more important than the actual dollars that we'll receive in the next legislative session. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rocky?
Anything else on the legislative resources trust fund item, or any other questions?
Okay, we'll go on to property owner outreach and the Clomar update and contact schedule.
Yeah, so kind of an exciting day for those of us watching the Clomar progress. If you read the full paper today, the notices in the form today. It'll also be published in the FM Extra and I believe the Wahpeton Daily News as the 3 papers where we need to publish the notification of the Clomar. And we've been really waiting on that notification. It's not final approval, but FEMA doesn't generally sign off on sending out the notifications unless approval was imminent. And so we expect approval to happen in the coming weeks or maybe a month. This is something that we've anticipated a long time. There was a Clomar that was approved for Plan A. So this has been a lot of work to update it to Plan B and get concurrence. And so this is a conditional letter of map revision is what a Clomar is. It's about the best assurance you can get that you're building the project will alter, you know, the flood risk reduction as you intended to. And so after the project, you still got to go back to FEMA and file a LOMR, a letter of map revision, to make it confirmed. But this is really the best assurance for those, you know, paying flood insurance or those worried about the maps changing in the future, that the project's going to do what we're saying it's going to do. And FEMA's signed off on the hydraulic model. So now you got to follow through and get to the end of the day. But this is a big step, not just for the project, but it's also a great milestone for outreach and land acquisition. It really sets in stone a lot of the upstream areas and what the project does when it operates and who it impacts. So that allows, you know, a good snapshot in time to go out and talk to people, you know, show them the maps. It's a little more validation because FEMA's approved it. So we have an outreach effort planned, a pretty large campaign that's planned, where we'll have individual maps sent out to all impacted property owners, along with a letter from either the Joint Board or the MIC Board on the Minnesota side, along with a letter from the Diversion Authority, and also some information about the mitigation plan that's been approved in North Dakota, and we're working with the Minnesota DNR on some of the issues there. Do want to flag one potential issue we had, and I think we've had some sort of smaller group discussions on this, but I think it's a good outreach discussion too. We have a lot more confirmation on the North Dakota side on what the mitigation requirements are. So when we look at the model, we can go out and say, okay, here's what the requirements tell us we need to do with your property or with this landowner. On the Minnesota side, we're waiting for final permit conditions. You know, that's what that lawsuit is all about. And until we get final permit conditions and understand, you know, what the exact language are of those permit conditions, some of the area, we're still maybe a little more flexible on what the end result's going to be. And so it creates some tougher conversations. I mean, for a majority of the area, it's not going to alter things probably, but for that fringe area, it could have significant impact differences, you know, on where mitigation is required. And so when we send out these letters, we're going to have some work to do on what is the message and who do we contact. Because I think that's always been a tricky part too, is who do we contact? Because if you get a letter versus don't get a letter, then you start a lot of conversations with neighbors and communities and that sort of thing. But in Minnesota, it might end up being a broader, you know, more general letter, you know, with more general maps. It's maybe not ideally what we want, but not sure the timing is going to work out perfect with the result of the court case. Well, that means when the court case is final and we have final permit conditions, we'll have to do another intensive round of outreach, you know, at least to just Minnesota, if not to everybody again. I don't know if there's any questions on that.
Any questions for Rocky? All right, item 4 is the communications plan update and review.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this the last couple meetings. Last meeting, we really went through some of the sort of demographic information and survey results. And I think one of the key points I've tried to do through this process is to really try to get a data-driven. And I think we got a lot of data from the survey, but we also did a lot of meetings. You know, we met with the outreach committee, but we probably had 10 or 12 other meetings with smaller groups, both internally and externally, to talk about internal communication and external communication. And we asked the same questions of everybody. You know, what are the areas of past success was sort of our first question. I wanted to give this committee a rundown of what we heard from the focus groups. And then we'll talk about where we're at next steps. We're hoping to bring back the draft plan for this committee next month. There's a couple variables in there that, you know, might not be ready for approval. It might be, but I think that's our intention. And so we'll go from there. But to walk through a couple of these, because I think you'll be interested in them, and thank you for taking part in them. So when we ask the first question, areas of past success, this is both project success and outreach program success. And so it's kind of diverse, but I think most groups had a lot of repeat information. Very few of these were, you know, only mentioned as one-offs. As we went through all the minutes of all the meetings, we tried to find consensus points. So our work with the Business Leaders Flood Task Force, Katie Mastel, who's on the committee now, is working with the chamber and sort of staffs up that group. I think that's been a really strong relationship. What we found in the data, you know, from the surveys too, is that word of mouth and talking to community leaders is so important, because that's who goes out and then shares information about the project. So that's been one targeted group. Obviously, hiring an executive director was a major success for the project, and to allow communications to have a central source and clear direction for the outreach program, I think has been really helpful. So it's been great to have Joel on board. The chair's year in review letter. This has kind of been done two ways, where we either have the chair set goals at the beginning of the year, or the outgoing chair send out sort of a year in review. Sometimes it's been the only update people have heard publicly for months, you know, at that time. And so it's been a good way to use the board leadership to really speak to their constituencies. Legislative funding, you know, I think we always end up talking about how we need more money, but when you actually look back at how we did the last 3 years, you know, there was a amendment to the federal PPA that increased $300 million. The state increased their support by $180 million. And so we had a lot of success. You know, I think we're always trying to fill the rest of the cup, but when you look back, it's been a successful area. The Diversion website, I think the website is pretty broad, and I think we heard this maybe on both sides of the coin. We have a lot of information on the website and a lot of resources. And so it's been an area of past success, but we also heard there's a lot of strategies to better leverage that and better organize it. So it's kind of a constant success and need to make it better. Candidate education. I think we've made this a regular part of our work for the last 5 to 8 years, and really made a point to go out and talk to candidates, get with them ahead of time before they get super busy, talk with them, meet with them, see what questions they have, and then follow up after elections too, and as they hear more, and really become a resource for them. So if they hear things from their constituents or have questions, they know who to contact. And I think a lot of people have been elected recently, and they come in with a background on the project, and it's not totally fresh to them. Monthly newsletter that gets sent out. This is a good way for people who already know they want to be interested in the project to stay up to date. It's maybe not a great resource for those who don't know anything about the project, but for those who want to stay up to date and sign up on their own, it's a good. We heard an awful lot about construction and construction visuals, the drone footages, that sort of thing. And so I think with the data in this, we found that construction is going to be a target focus. I think people like to see the dirt moving. North Dakota Water Magazine articles. This is somewhat significant. Probably not everybody gets this magazine, but there's a North Dakota Water puts out a monthly publication, really nice publication, and we've been in that for the last few years. It is a paid relationship, and so that's something that maybe we want to take forward. I think the suggestion to be in there originally came from Carol Lewis at the Water District, saying she goes a lot of the water conferences and has a lot of contacts, but people don't know a lot about the project around the state. And so this is really a targeted focus to water related people, so that they're not just guessing at what's going on over here. They have good regular information. Informational points that get distributed as major updates happen. This has been it was a key focus of Commissioner Sherling when she was chair, and so we tried to keep that on. Visible leadership. I know this is a point over the last couple chairs as well, that they wanted to have a more people-focused diversion authority, so it's not just the faceless entity, and really try to engage board members and get them to be present. Working to build a relationship with the DNR. I think that's maybe the most important thing that's done over the last 3 years, from when the permit was denied to where we're at now on the same side of a lawsuit, working together to defend the project. And that a lot of good work by a lot of people in that. And then presentations to local governments. This is sort of an interesting one, because at every meeting, people brought up how effective certain campaigns were that went out and did it. But as we looked in the future, we realized that, okay, how do we make sure we continue that success with a frequency or a regular occurrence, so that we don't just have these one-off successful campaigns? That how can we take these and use them for the future? And then just a point, these were just from the focus groups. I think we have a couple other resources that we could pull from, but these were just from the minutes of the groups that we met with. So then as we looked for, okay, how do we carry these forward with identifying goals and successful targets? These were some of the messages that we saw repeated over and over again. Consistent messaging. I think these are things we've all talked about as a committee multiple times. Construction visuals and updates on the construction progress. Really making it about personal stories. I know Mayor Judd was very strong on this, and so is places like the Forum and other media that are run off clicks. They want to have personal stories, not just updates on the project. So we're looking at better storytelling. Proactive messaging and addressing known issues. I think we all say that, but it's a really tough thing to put in place, because usually being proactive means admitting a certain level of risk by being the first one to talk about something. And so we were trying to balance that. Engaged board members. I think each of you is our best asset on this project. You each are, have your constituencies and have your resources. You're the best community leaders that can be talking about this, and obviously you're here, so you're the ones working at this. But I think we have other board members and other members on each of the entity boards that we can do a better job engaging. And so when they get asked about the project, they have positive things to say and updated things to say. Continued engagement at legislative levels. I think this is on all levels. I think we need to keep doing that, because as we talked about, funding isn't done. I think we're going to be talking about funding at the feds and state for the next 10 years probably, as we go forward. And so let's keep that in mind. Direct communication with upstream residents. This was a pretty strong one. I think we all feel pretty strongly in this, and you know, I know it affects me personally when you hear, well, no one's talked to me, you know, and sometimes for some people that can mean no one's talked to me in 6 months, and other people it means I haven't heard anybody in 2 weeks, you know, and so trying to figure out what is the right regular interval to reach people, because everybody's a little bit different. Some people, you know, have said they get enough information in the survey, and a lot of people said they didn't. So we're trying to figure out how to make the information accessible. So for people that want it more often, we're there. So this was sort of the more fun side of the focus groups, and people got to start brainstorming and whiteboarding potential ideas for outreach. And this will really be the basis for our next step, is trying to say, look at the data, look at what we've done well, look at our goals, then how do you craft these into meeting those goals and reaching the target audiences? So social media, it's pretty clear that Facebook is the dominant information source, and we should be on there. And so we need to figure a way to do that effectively, because there's, you know, definitely risks or pros and cons to Facebook engagement. Recreational opportunities, I think since MetroCog made a bunch of media with that study, I know Joel's mentioned several times, he's heard that it's been a pretty positive message out in the public. So we need to figure out how to balance that with obviously the fiscal constraints. Finding business and legislative champions. I was at a legislative meeting on Monday, and they had asked the speaker they brought in that wasn't involved with our project, but asked, you know, what can we do as Cass County legislators to be more effective? And they said you really need to identify project champions, because there's so many Cass County legislators that you can't all be champions, but you can have the identified ones, and so we're trying to help them with that. Engage with the Moorhead Business Association. You know, this is something we've done periodically, but we haven't made it a regular thing. I know I've presented to them multiple times, and Commissioner Campbell's joined me at some of those, and it's always been effective, but I think we can do more there. Targeted television ads. You know, again, I think this is something that, you know, not just blast out a bunch of stuff on the TV, but when there's key events, you know, like a national championship game, which should happen every year, you know, target those things. Public displays showing progress. I think we got some good feedback when we did these, you know, that info map. We had those displayed at the library and at the mall for a while. I know I heard a lot of comments, but maybe showing things like that, some educational kiosks, those sort of things. Storytelling videos, we've tried to do more of those. I think what I'd like to figure out how to do is to leverage those more, not necessarily just produce more things, but figure out what we're producing and how to leverage them more. But really featuring construction workers. I think especially now when unemployment's so high and you know, with all the COVID effects, you know, the construction workers keeping people employed. In Western North Dakota, the legislators are talking about how do we apply more public funds just to keep workers in North Dakota so they don't leave again. And so I think, you know, we can be helpful with those type of things. Partners with trade associations, newspaper advertorials, that's sort of like we do in North Dakota Water, but maybe we need a regular column in the Forum or something like that just on construction updates. Podcast is something that I know we've been pushing ourselves a little bit, but I think, you know, a monthly podcast with a technical expert or Joel giving a status update, those things could be really effective. One thing another water project does in the state is they hold an annual conference. Red River Water Valley Supply Project does a conference, and anybody who wants to know about the project can come in, and we have a lot of different topics to cover. It's a good targeted way to get legislators or interested public, you know, a free conference to come in and do that thing. We've also talked about a candidate academy where, you know, maybe for the other consultants on the project or for other elected officials or public staff, you know, do a 4-hour morning session or an afternoon session where you just come in and get a deep dive in the project and then, you know, sort of check the box and you know what it's about. Construction site cameras, this came up a lot. It's always kind of interesting to the public to be able to sort of go on a webcam online and see what's going on. Kind of just a voyeuristic, you know, view of the project, but I think that could be fun. Some targeted billboards. You know, we do have Wild Rice River Control Structure going on right by the interstate. People are probably driving by wondering what it is, and we've talked about, you know, doing targeted billboards. Enhanced flyover videos. I think that flyover video we have is one of the most popularly viewed things. Keeping that updated. Engaged board members publicly. Again, you guys are our best assets as board and committee members, and so how do we leverage you? Virtual reality, continuing to sort of push the the boundaries on what we can do. I think those were at the groundbreaking in 2017. We did some Google Cardboard views where you can look out at the field and you could see the project there. Just some neat things like that. Regional editorial boards. This is really more of a target that we need to target beyond the form. And I think we've tried that, but we maybe haven't gone out and done, a road show to, the Star Tribune or the Paper and Holly or those type of things, and really try to get a broader regional look at the project, because we know people talk about it, and so let's try to reach them. And then a regular contacts and a systematic approach. So again, getting back to, we do successful campaigns, but maybe time goes by and we said, oh yeah, we just talked to them. But then you look and it's been a year and a half or something. This project's gone on a long time. And so a way to really have a systematic approach to making sure we're staying in contact. So that was an awful lot of ideas. You probably can't do them all, 100%, but for certain target audience groups, which one of these will be effective in trying to link those together. And so maybe that's our next step, is to link the data with the survey, with the focus group data, and then figure out what are the strategies that achieve those specific goals. And then of course, wrapping Joel in there along the way to evaluate to make sure that's consistent with other areas of the project. And obviously with fiscal constraints and things we need to do to move the other areas of the project. So then with the draft plan, we'll bring to the committee, and hopefully for committee approval or recommendation for approval to the board, however the committee wants to handle that. And then bring it to the board ultimately for approval, and then start to execute the plan.
So when do we start?
Well, there's a lot of talking about it, so if anybody wants to discuss for a minute, I should grab my water.
So Joel, are you planning regular updates to the public at all? Like through media, somehow to give the general public coming from the top where the project's at today and maybe where we've come from. Is that something that would be on your schedule to do?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So we've talked about doing monthly newsletters, and we currently do that to a certain extent on the website, but it doesn't really go out to the papers and isn't a mass distribution. I've gotten a lot of feedback that people want to know what's being constructed and how things are being implemented, and we are in this unique position right now where we're transitioning into that implementation phase. And so obviously once we get started with full-scale construction on the diversion channel, and we have a few more core projects under construction next summer, there's going to be a lot of content as far as construction progress is concerned. And I think certainly moving into next year, we need to be doing those monthly updates so the public knows what's going on, what's being constructed, what the progress is, what roads are going to be closed, all those sorts of things. And so we'll really be able to provide a lot of practical content for the public as far as that's concerned. I think in my perspective, one of the most difficult things is to take some of these complicated issues and put them in a format that just the general public that isn't involved in finance or engineering and really be able to get those concepts across to the general public. And I think that's been a challenge of the diversion project for quite some time. We talk about WIFIA, and the board knows exactly what that is. But you ask somebody, a general acquaintance that doesn't, maybe sometimes follows what's going on with the project. And WIFIA, that doesn't stand for anything. I don't know what that means. And but it's such a significant component of our project that the public should understand that. I mean, as Mr. Shockley has explained, that loan alone, it will save us $600 million on the long-term debt service related to this project. So that's a pretty significant thing the public should understand. But I think in general, if you took a polling of 10 people, not one of them would really understand what that WIFIA was. So I think it just presents a lot of different challenges that need to be strategized and incorporated into this communications plan. One thing from a staffing level that Rocky didn't hit on is we're moving forward and we'll be advertising for the communications director position, which will really take accountability over this communications plan and ensure the implementation is done in a fashion that is acceptable to the public outreach and the board, and really start to put a lot of strategy behind, how we tackle some of those unique challenges that we've had in the past. So, long answer to your short question, but yes, it's certainly something that we continue to discuss the best way to try to go about communicating. And you talk about, just months like this last month that we had, a lot of internal activity, a lot of things going on, but just not a whole lot to share with the public. Construction continues on the inlet and the wild rice, but we had no new projects starting, and so you don't want to oversaturate people either with information that just tends to be disregarded by folks over time because they're getting too much information. So communication is not my specialty, and that's the reason we're pursuing a communications director, and we're going to bring on somebody that is professionally trained in communication and can provide continued strategy on how we implement this communications plan in the near future. So we're excited about that, and I think this committee should be too, because I think it's going to just add to all the great work that Rocky and other staff and consultants have put into this project, and really kind of ramp up this next phase as we move into implementation. So.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Hey, just to follow up on your question, so see the communication plan, next steps, and plans always should have some type of dates. And so I see the third bullet there is draft plan reviewed by committee. A goal date on that at all? 2 months, 3 months, next month, what are the thoughts? I mean, it's a pile on to Roger's question, but there's a plan, next step, and every plan I've ever had, you put dates in there for expectations. So what's your thoughts on that?
I'll defer to Rocky on this.
Yeah, I think earlier in the presentation we talked about the intent is to bring that to you next month.
Next month.
Yep, and if the committee's ready to approve it at that time or not, that's
great.
And Rocky, if I may, just follow up on some logistics to Commissioner Steen's comments. Would we be able to, get a draft to the Public Outreach Committee? Because I feel like we'd love to be able to have enough time for a thorough review, submission of comments, and discussion on those comments and how we incorporate those into the communications plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was maybe my hesitancy earlier when I talked about the timeline, was that you may want to have opportunity to sort of file and receive and do a second reading type thing before you move it on, because I would like to get some feedback on the draft, and it's tough to just bring a draft and then kick it out, but just it's up to you guys.
I think it's great to bring it to the committee, get some feedback, bring it back to the next draft the following month, and then go forward from there. That's my thoughts.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah.
One of the struggles we've had over the last few months with the COVID situation has really brought to light too. One of the best things I think we've done on the project was our work with civic groups, and whenever there's a major update, you go around to all the Kiwanis and Rotary clubs and those sort of things that have opportunities of interested public. It's tough to find interested public sometimes that wants to hear your message, and so those have been great opportunities. And so trying to figure out, are those a thing of the future or not? What's the long-term plan with those? And if that's not part of our immediate strategy over the next couple of years, what can we do to reach those same people that want to know about it and that are good, community-minded, word-of-mouth type leaders? So.
Just a suggestion, just like WIFIA, there's other names, other things that we maybe know about that the public doesn't, why not just put a glossary type insert into our website that maybe explains what a WIFIA is and what, you know, other things that they're pertinent to what's going on today. And then just kind of keep updating that as the project goes along, and just add some more words or that need to be explained, and maybe the public can grasp that and understand what we're talking about.
That's a good idea. It's a constant effort to update. I think we do have one in our communications plan appendix from the last time, but you're right. There's probably 100 new ones that we need to make sure we keep adding and updating. So.
I think it's important not to have too many at one time,
Yeah.
you know, because it kind of gets lost then.
Yep.
You know, let's not have the Webster Dictionary, you know, right out of the chute. So, all right. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two questions. I'm curious as to this draft plan. Is this a plan that encompasses 24 months? Is it a 10-year plan? Is it a 2-year plan? Like, what is the length of the plan? That's the first question. And then the second question, if you click back to the former, so this one, these different ideas, I don't know if there is a prioritization of which works better or how you want to do this, but I'm wondering if there's, are you planning to put in like a time or a task timeline plan on frequency of doing this? So if you're going to engage with more business association, how frequently will that occur? Yep. So that it's almost like a tickling within the calendaring system to know, okay, we did it 6 months ago, we need to do another update in 6 months, or is that going to be incorporated as part of the plan too?
And that's exactly right. So the next stage of this is we have a pretty large matrix of, okay, what target audience are we trying to reach? What strategies make sense for that target audience? You know, what's the time frame? And I think the last one on here is then find a technology way to systematically check those, so we can go back and quantitatively make sure we're following the plan, and it's not just somebody paging through a book and making sure we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, that's right on. And then kind of blanking on the first question again now.
The how long?
Oh, how long is the plan? That's a good question. We talked with Joel about that right away, and as much as possible, Joel really wanted to make this a living document, so it's something that can be updated without having to totally shelve and start over. This will be our third communications plan for the project, and so we've done it about every 3 years. And I sort of see that as the different stages of the project, where you really had the study phase, and then you had sort of the selling it phase, if you will, and then now we're in the construction phase. I expect this can probably be, a 5-6 year plan that you may have to modify as technology changes. I think with the first plan, we were just happy to have a website, and so technology's just changed so much. But this hopefully can get us through construction phase. And I think as you look at sort of the long-term O&M, I think very much you're going to change what type of communication you need to do. And so that changes, and maybe you don't have a plan at that point. It becomes, something different. But this is hopefully the construction phase of the project, which gets us to operations. That's how I see this anyways. But some of these things will be a 1 year thing, and there'll be a timeline in that, that we'll need to do immediately, and then you sort of check the box, and others will be an ongoing, some sort of interval.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Roger?
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, I want to focus for a minute on the communications with upstream, and particularly those on the Clay County side. On the Cass County side, there's been activity for quite some time, and I think they're familiar with the Joint Water Resource District as being the ones handling a lot of that. Today, I still get calls once in a while where my name has been referred to them as somebody that maybe they can get some information from. I really think that, and Eric, this is kind of going to you too, that now that we're closer with this CLOMAR and we're pinning down closer the areas of impact, that type of thing, the sooner we can send out a letter to them, which would include an introduction of the MIC board, who the people are, and let them know that they are there to help get the answers they need. I mean, right now I'm getting contacts that they've gotten my name through somebody else. Now, keep in mind, this isn't to interfere with land agents and those types of things as they actually do some negotiations. But even prior to that, there are questions, and maybe they want to be able to call Shelley and find something out, or they can call any one of the MIC board members. And I think there should be an introductory thing to all of those people on the Clay County side as to who we are as a MIC board. And ultimately, the decisions that will come down will come before that board, you know. But I think it gives them, it would give them some faces and some names that they feel they can contact. And the whole idea is to not get the answers through rumor mills, but to be able to have resources to go to, you know, and it might be that they might have a lot of questions, and I might defer them to Eric, but at least it gives them some sense that they have somebody to go to. And so I think we haven't done that. I wonder how many people know that Shelley Carlson is on our MIC board.
That's a great comment, Commissioner Campbell, and we'll make sure all of the questions go to Shelley Carlson from now. You know, I joke a little bit, but you're spot on. And I think I've raised this issue before, and you know, I've seen it on the Cass County side where landowners are getting letters from Cass County, the Cass Joint Board, the Diversion Authority, their land agents, you know, different consultant letterhead, and it's extremely confusing for a landowner. You know, they don't understand the structure of how it's all being implemented and being held. So I would also maybe recommend that letter of introduction has maybe a chart that shows the overall structure of how things are related to each other, to maybe try to provide some level of understanding of how everything's tied together. But I think it's an excellent idea, and you're right, it's something that we have not done yet, and a lot of people don't even know the MCC JPA even exists.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of my point. And again, what I said was it can give them a resource to help them get the answers they need. Yeah. Not the necessarily answers they want, but the answers they need. They might be two different things.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Campbell, you know, I think one thing that would be helpful to share with the committee, I know you'll see it on the MIC board, but we have the sample Clomer packet that has a letter from the MIC board. We can maybe take some of the advice here and go back and freshen that up and then share it with the committee, because that might go out before our next committee meeting. The Clomer's kind of been a tough process to nail down an exact timeline on, but I think, you know, either right before or right after the next meeting is probably the timeline we're looking at. So we'll make sure to share that with the committee so you can weigh in on it.
I think personalizing it so that they know that there's people working on this and we care about their concerns. That, you know,
absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to show you a feature on the website. If you click about the project, there's a glossary that will scroll down, and we have sort of every term here. And, you know, like BFE is something the floodplain engineers will talk about a lot, the base flood elevation. So, you know, you can click on it. Hopefully it'll load quickly for you. But so then it pulls up just, you know, a little glossary of what it is. And we try to have that for everything. And I'm going to randomly click on WIFIA here, and I'm just going to see we don't have WIFIA on here. So we need to take a look at this and make sure we have it. But I think for a lot of this, it's, you know, words we use all the time like PPA, that at least we try to have a source, but, you know, getting people to find it is always a tricky part too. So I understand that.
All right, any other questions at this time?
Mr. Chair, if I could make one more comment, and Rocky, maybe you could go back to the slide that has the scope items listed out. Yeah, thank you. So just one thing to note, and this is just coming from your executive director, each one of these things takes resources as well. And so as we go through and determine all of these different great communication avenue, we have to keep in mind that everything requires resources and time. And so Rocky and I have had this discussion, you know, about how do we go about doing all these things and who's doing them and who's accountable for ensuring that they occur. And, you know, just to keep in mind, a shotgun approach is good in certain cases. A rifle approach is good in certain cases. And so, you know, I worry sometimes that we've identified this whole list, which is great. We've done this dreaming session, we put them all out there. But as we go through this, you know, as far as the timing and when these are done, we need to keep an eye on our resources and what we have available. Now, if the board and the committee wants to recommend additional resources for public outreach, that's fine with me. We just need to keep that in lockstep with what we're requesting for a scope. So I just want to caution, I think it's a good discussion, and as we, you know, get into the you know, approving a final update to the communications plan, you know, that could be a discussion that we also have as well. So
Might have to come with some financing is what you're saying.
it could possibly, depending on how robust we want to make this. So
Rick, you'll handle that, right?
Different thought on this would be, I wouldn't worry about trying to get it all done. I say let's get some of it going.
yeah.
And to wait until it's all put together, it's gonna, like you said, it's a big task.
Yeah.
You pick out some of these things and get going on what we can, worry about those that we want to get done. I mean, if you wait until you get this whole thing put together, it's gonna drag out. I mean, it's a lot. I don't disagree, but let's work on some of it and get that out to the public.
Yes.
So I'm thinking,
Absolutely, Commissioner
bite off a little
Steve.
bit at a time.
And we are doing, you know, a lot of these, maybe not, you know, formally tracking it as much as we will hope to when we implement the plan. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, we'll stair step into this, but at some point, I think it's just a good discussion to have. You know, are we getting a return on the scope that we're doing with the information that we have? And obviously, you know, we'll manage it internally and we'll bring up any concerns, but it just needs to be something to consider as we settle in on some of these approaches.
So just one more question on our postcard survey, and some of the, you know, some of the answers we got back. Certainly, we can probably coordinate that with, you know, with our communications plan.
Yep.
And try to use that to better inform, you know, this certain groups.
Yep, I think that'll be invaluable data when we need to target different groups for different reasons. Yeah.
And as far as, and I don't know if a public meeting is in order in Minnesota to get as many people in a room and to hear the message, or if you want to do it through a letter.
Well, maybe just to interrupt quick, you know, an item on here is the Drain 27 restoration public meeting. We've had two of them now, one in April and one last night. We've seen a lot of success in having these small group virtual meetings that are targeted sort of populations, and given the conditions we're in, especially with the order today in Minnesota, that they're effective. And we've actually had really great dialogue back and forth with the attendees. Kind of impressive that last night, you know, we had a lot of questions from the public and there was no technology issues. A lot of questions got answered. A lot of questions we took back to learn more on. And I think that's something we could do for other areas of the project. And so we should consider that. Maybe that's a method that we can use for, you know, the make board, and just invite Minnesota landowners, you know, and try to do something like that.
Well, it gives the people a chance to voice their question and voice their opinion about the project.
Just a logistic update, there is not a land management committee meeting today, so we're not pressed at the 3 o'clock time frame, just to give a heads up.
Okay, next item is the construction video updates.
If you guys are okay, we have 2 short videos of the construction status that I think are always effective to play. And I guess I would encourage everybody too, if you're comfortable, you know, sharing and talking about these with either your, you know, circles that you're in or on social media, that's always helpful. This is the diversion inlet and control structure south of Horace. And this was flown last week, I think. Earlier this week, maybe. I will say I emailed out the link, so it might not stream well for those watching. Just an FYI. That's a bit loud. Maybe if you did have questions while it was on.
Looks like there's been some pouring going on.
Yeah, I think there's a construction pouring actually happening. Is it tomorrow or Monday? Something like that. In the next couple of days, they're pouring construction on the site, and that's pouring concrete. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the schedule is for next Monday. It got delayed due to the rain that we had this last weekend, but it'll be the first pour. So, you know, I think Terry had invited any of us to come out there if somebody wanted to be. Maybe put your initials in there, Roger. Yes.
Just a comment, as we get a little further along the project, a time video.
Sure.
On what it looked like when it was a farm field and you know, so you can kind of see the progress.
Absolutely, that's a good idea. I like this view. You can see kind of the ramp down into the channel. Yeah. I thought that was kind of neat.
It's a real thing.
Yeah. This part starts to make me a little queasy, to be honest, but it's a cool shot.
So does the Corps have people out here monitoring, or how does that work?
They do. You know, they have somewhat limited travel, and sort of interesting. Joel met with the colonel the other day just because he was willing to drive one of the cars to the construction site. He was there on kind of a no travel restriction, but they had to bring up some cars, so he took the opportunity. So it's probably more limited than usual. But that's one thing we've heard from the colonel too, is that he loves these videos because we send them the raw footage, so that, you know, they get, you know, everything not quite edited down like this, so they can view the site and show their counterparts in DC and catch things.
Mr. Chair, one suggestion I would have, instead of using the acronyms within the video, like instead of USAC or whatever, to actually spell out, you know, United States Army Corps of Engineers. Okay. Because when it's being shared with the public, they're not necessarily going to understand what those acronyms mean, and it helps to connect.
Yep.
Who are the people working on all the projects?
Mr. Chairman, it's Ken Polk speaking.
Go ahead, Chairman. Commissioner.
At some point, I can see that we'll want to have a construction open house and invite the public out on an afternoon or a late afternoon or something, just to see what the progress is and to engage the public that way too.
Joel, is that?
I think that's certainly doable. We can coordinate that with the Corps, and I think they would be open to allowing that. We'll just have to check on some site security and safety issues that the Corps might have, but we can check on that and report back.
You know, we were going to have a tour last Wednesday for the public through North Dakota Water, and that's our regular tour we do every summer, but that was canceled. So
that was COVIDed?
Yep, COVIDed. Okay, so one more this is just a 2-minute video of the Wild Rice River control structure. I think you recall last month that this was pretty much just dirt scraped on the field out there, and so you can start to see work is really ramping up on this as well. really hoping there's no acronyms in this video, but I don't remember. So.
Do you know, is the contractor using any local people, any equipment?
Yeah, the question is, are there any local contractors being used by Ames? And I guess I don't know that for sure, but we have, Jason Ellard is on the line with the North Dakota Building Trades Union, and I know he probably has much more intimate knowledge of that, unless Joel, you have good knowledge of that. But if you wanted Jason to speak, I hope he's still on anyways. I saw him on earlier.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of all the subcontractors that Ames has on the project. I know there's some local consultants working on the geotech side out there, and Ames does have a number of sub-consulting that are on the project. Ames is local. They're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, yeah. Right? And the majority of their staff are all living here in Fargo, and I'm sad to report the tornado that hit in Otter Tail County a few weeks ago. The fatality was one of the workers on the inlet site that worked for Ames. So very devastating, and we certainly keep his family in our thoughts and prayers. So.
Thank you. Any other questions here on video analytics, item 6?
There's the analytics in your packet there. I can pull them up on the screen too, I guess. I think one thing we found is sort of tracking these from month to month. They're not all that interesting when you look at them, but they do, again, good data driven from month to month. Great open rate on all of our newsletter. We have newsletter goes out to 1,400 people who have signed up. I think you can debate if that's a good number or not, but we see a steady increase in that. And the fact that we have 1,400 and still have a strong open rate, I think that's positive. I think people are really interested in construction. I think when you look a little deeper at the analytics, we have a very clear curve that Monday through Friday, people go to the website a lot and they read a lot, and on the weekends they don't at all. So I think this is very much a workday driven information. And things like websites and newsletters, they're really almost targeted at those who have some interest in the project. The general public, will come and go occasionally, but they're not your regular, attendees. And so I think that's what we see in our open rates too, of the interesting things that have come out. Again, just trying to be data driven so we can look at these as sort of traits over time.
So the difference between open and click?
Yeah, so open is when you open the email, and then click is when you, so that we usually have an abbreviated version on the email, and then it's click here to read more. Okay. And so you can see that some people just open, and if they're not interested or whatever, then they don't click on it. But I think it's healthy to have those close together. because that means everybody that opens the email is interested in reading more about it. And you can see they're fairly close for the most part. I think where you see the bigger gaps are maybe where there's not really more information. You know, where you get the story from the headline, like 100 million from the Corps and the work plan. That's pretty much the whole story. You know, so you can click to read more to find out more, but you're not going to learn a whole lot.
Anything else you want to
Nothing
talk
else on
about?
that.
Okay. Any questions? Next item is the community engagement. Drain 27 wetland restoration public meeting. And that was last night, right?
Yep, that was held last night. This was a Corps held meeting. They are in the middle of an environmental assessment for the wetland project, which is just on the south side of the southern embankment, kind of in the Camel's Hump area, right where Drain 27 kind of runs its course on the southern side of that. It was a good meeting. I think we had 38 people in the virtual room. You know, probably a third of those were, you know, either local members or Corps members, but there was a lot, all the landowners I think around that area had attended, and maybe some members of the public. Thought the Corps did a nice educational job talking about why we have to do wetland restoration as part of the project, what are the benefits of a wetland, and kind of what the next steps are. It's a aggressive schedule. They're in the middle of a comment period. I think the comment period goes through Monday, so if anybody's interested in placing a comment about that, it's open right now. So maybe that's the important outreach side of things. Addition to that, then they hope to award the bid, I think, at the end of 2021, with construction starting in 2022. So it's a project that's moving forward. There were a lot of questions from the landowners, a lot of the similar ones that we got back in April when we held it, but we had, I think, better information. Local drainage was a discussion. You know, what happens if the rain events exceed a certain level, you know, and impact areas outside the wetlands. So a lot of those good questions. I think there's definitely was a more emotional sentiment, I think, from the questions last night than at the previous meeting, as maybe they realizing the project's moving forward and land acquisition is becoming more, you know, on the forefront. And so I think it was good discussion. You got to have those healthy discussions to get to the next stage. I think probably the biggest, trickiest part maybe from a public side is, you know, a lot of that area is a wetland according to the scientific definition, but if you drove out there, it looks like a farm field. And so that's tough for those farming it to think their land is a wetland when they're farming it. And so, you know, that was maybe a point of tension at the meeting, but it's sort of interesting to dig into the science of the soils and discover something that maybe is different than your perception. But I think it was a very successful meeting, and again, I think we should look at how we can use that format. So we've held 2 of them now without much hiccups and great participation, both in attendance and questions. And so I think we should look at doing more of that, because it's cheaper too than setting up a public meeting, less time involved, and, you know, click off and still wearing shorts or whatever the case is, you know, but you can, you know, do it from anywhere. So it's great. I don't know if there's any questions on that. I guess maybe the only other thing is, I know one of Joel's efforts has been to talk with some other entities that maybe have interest in wetlands, that, you know, have looked at the MetroCog study and have seen these public meetings and have, you know, maybe a similar public interest. You know, so while we're focused on flood protection, this is a public project, and how can you utilize that, you know, across the spectrum of public need? And so there might be some updates there in the future.
So these other partners, are they willing to bring money to the table, or are they just willing to support the project in their group?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. The idea is that there could potentially be private funding for incorporation of wetland features, recreation features, sustainability and habitat development features from some of these other groups. So we did have a great call this morning, Rocky and I did, with a number of those entities, the Audubon Society, Ducks Unlimited, a number of others, and they're all very, very interested. And you know, getting involved and, providing, whatever support they can to really make sure that we don't miss the bus, so to say, with this wetland project, but really the entire diversion project. So I think it was very positive. We really, I think, are bringing a few more stakeholders to the table that, could provide funding and incorporate additional public benefit into the diversion project. And, I think that's a great thing. So we're going to continue to discuss that with those groups and pursue whatever avenues might come out of that. So.
And this wetland is going to be used to mitigate our impact to wetlands? Is that correct? Or the project's impact?
Yeah, the Drain 27 wetland project is the offset for the removal of the wetlands related to the southern embankment in North Dakota. So it takes care of all of the wetlands for the southern embankment. The wetlands for the channel component will be mitigated along with the channel itself. And then the stuff that's contained on the Minnesota side would have to be mitigated somewhere else as well. So,
just I'll pull up on the screen here, but fmdiversion.gov/drain27. If anybody's interested, they have a informational sheet about the project. You can see the presentation that was given last night, maps of the project, why wetlands are important. So I think a lot of those, good-looking guy to the right over here. Wait, that's me.
Incidentally, it will be the largest wetland, the closest to the Fargo-Moorhead area that we have, and there are a lot of groups that are interested in wetlands, from an educational standpoint and just for a public benefit standpoint. So,
okay, it's getting long enough here. We'll keep going.
Mr. Chair, I have to leave for another meeting. So.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So the Valley,
we don't have a lot else. I just update quickly on this and then we can wrap it up. But Valley Prosperity Partnership's a joint group between Fargo and Grand Forks, and we continue to work with them. They're continuing to meet, and I guess I wanted to put that on there to remind folks that we do have availability for, I don't know how civic groups are doing this, but we're happy to help virtually present to groups. And if you're looking in your own groups for educational times, I think we're more than happy to be there again. I think maybe should start reaching out and proposing that, especially as we reach some of these milestones with the Clomer, resolution of the litigation and those sort of things. What's another good opportunity to go out there and do that? But we rely on you all a lot to kind of connect us with those groups that you need to be invited to. So keep that in mind.
availability?
Yeah, that's just, we're available for those things. So.
All right. So the last item is adjournment. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.